costs. We're now going to move on to our second keynote, Elizabeth Churchill. I saw Elizabeth speak in San Diego last year. I was very fortunate to catch her talk. It was, I thought it had great relevance to government. We don't actually have many experimental psychologists or digital ethnographers working in government, and yet the types of information, the types of research they're doing are directly relevant to government. The sorts of things we're talking about are examples like digital content management, index curation and archiving, doing serendipitous information encountering, and actually thinking about how people like to have conversations. It was a point, I guess, that Ros made, which is around you can engage with people through technology channels, but in a lot of cases those technology channels have to be ways that people who are not used to technology are comfortable with, and it may not be a computer screen and keyboard. So I'd like to welcome Elizabeth.
Good morning, everybody. Just get ourselves set up here. Can't see any of you. I'm at Yahoo Research, and my world, as Mike just said, is a little bit different from yours. I've been very involved in trying to come up with new ways of getting people involved with each other and going from being aware of each other or downloading information to actually sharing and building knowledge together. And so what I'm going to talk about today is it's going to be fairly high level and give some examples of some of the projects I've done. But I'm around all day, so I'd love to talk further about how some of the examples I give may or may not fit in with your day-to-day lives and what you've been thinking about. All right, hopefully we're up here. And the work I'm going to talk about today, most of it has been done at Yahoo Research, but some of it was done previously when I was working at Fuji Xerox and at Xerox PARC. So I'm really coming here representing the kind of work and the kinds of things I'm interested in, sort of ethnography for design approach that I've taken, rather than specifically Yahoo-centric work. We've been talking a lot about who's on the internet, and as you see from these numbers, there are a lot of people currently on the internet, and you know we live in a world and a time when numbers are really important, and the bigger the number the better it is, right? So I get overwhelmed by all the numbers. There's a lot of people on the internet, about 23.8% of the world's population, which sounds like it's a huge number, but it's still not everybody. There's a lot of people left out of that. And here are the statistics for where in the world people are coming to the internet. And I just highlighted the United States, Japan, and the United Kingdom because, like any good social scientist, I wanted to give you a sense of me and where I come from, because my perspectives are obviously biased by the things that I've done, the places I've been. And those are the places that I've worked and done ethnographic work and design work, and built systems or designed systems, and had a couple of products out. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the kind of worlds that I've navigated. And those huge numbers are really interesting. And often, people will say, we've got 250,000 users doing X, Y, or Z. But in those aggregate numbers are the real details. I know, sorry. Right over here. The reason being that these were data from Flickr. And at that time, from 2005, there weren't a lot of people in New Zealand actually using Flickr. So these data were visualized based on a sample of 1 million people from Flickr. As I say, it's a sample. And this is their self-reported location from their profiles. And what the colors represent is the number or the percentage of their photographs that they have public. So the greener means you have more photos public, red means you have fewer public. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that Flickr is set up, as many of you know. How many of you have used Flickr? Yay, great. So I don't have to talk about the access control privileges. You know, you can do public, friends and family, or you can have folders now. At this time you couldn't, where you specify only a few people can see, so it's essentially private, except for a few people that you've nominated. Well, the defaults were public. And so one of the things that this demonstrates is that a lot of people actually change the defaults when they upload the pictures. But also, it really showed that, you know, there are real differences in the ways in which people perceive privacy or public or sharing. And Scandinavia and Utah seem to be very private. They'd share fewer of their pictures. Now, what's particularly interesting about that is those sorts of details lead to a lot of innovations, whereas the aggregate numbers, I think, can lead to innovation, like, oh, everybody's interested in this, we should do it. But this leads to a sort of, there were a whole series of nuanced access control privileges things that came, ideas that came from looking at these data. The other thing, so here's the data about age and number of contacts. And the data get messy on the left-hand side because it's very sparse up at the age, the higher the age. This is self-reported age, but as people get older, they tend to share less. And if you have fewer people, if you have friends, contact lists of between 2, 4, and 12, you tend to be sharing fewer of your pictures publicly. If you have a lot of friends, you tend to have more publicly as a percentage of your photos. And so we use these ideas to really think about what kinds of innovation in the interface could we give people to support them to share differently. And I think what was interesting about visualizing the data was that also, you know, we look at those red blotches and we say, wow, look at that. Everybody in Scandinavia seems to be really careful about how they share their content. Well, without actually going and talking to people, you can't find out why. And so what we did was we did a follow-up with phone interviews and email interviews to try and find out what was going on for people that they were making their decisions. We didn't say, hey, you people seem to be very private. We just said, hey, how do you share pictures on Flickr? And so we started to develop a rich story around motivation in different areas that was indicated by the data that made us go and look at the data more deeply. We didn't just stop at the data, and that really comes to speak to the kind of work that we do that in the introduction was pointed out, which is it's large data visualizations, but then follow up with ethnographic work to try and work out what the motivations are and what people's experiences are that lead them to do certain things. So what are the other sorts of things that we know about people? So they're not just numbers in buckets, but, you know, people tell us a lot about themselves on their profiles. They self-elect to tell us information about themselves. And, you know, more and more we're putting these sorts of information into systems to hopefully tailor our experiences. And, you know, what we go off and do on the back end is we look at people and we start to put them in back buckets and we start to say, hey, how can we predict whether you're more likely to do one thing rather than another? So all of these different, going from the details up to the aggregate and back down, are all parts of our everyday activity. And what my group does is it uses these techniques, data visualization, surveys. We've just finished a survey of developers on the Yahoo Developer Network. We've been talking here about open and tailoring and so forth. We do field studies. We go out. I'm just finishing up a field study, which is talking to people about how they consume news, local news in particular. We've all heard, I'm sure, about the demise of the newspapers, and the newspapers are going away. That print publication that made your fingers dirty is going away, apparently. And so we've been out talking to people in interviews about how they get their news. What is it that really matters to them? How do they find it? Are you reading it on your iPhone? Is it the same experience or different? What's missing for you? Do you use news aggregators or not? So those are the kinds of studies, going out and getting off our seats and going and talking to people and observing people. And I'm going to give you a case study from the world of online dating in a few minutes. We also build prototypes and what I call proto-products. So my group is very involved. I'm going to show you a couple of prototypes in proof of concept prototypes, but also prototypes that we put out and plugins that we put out, and see if our hunches about how people are using these kinds of communication technologies actually pay off. We gather data, we have a look at patterns, we look at diffusion through social graphs to see how people are sharing stuff, to test our hypotheses that we have generated either from data visualization or fieldwork about how people might react differently with different tools to each other and to the content we're sharing. And the background, we tend to be, I call us sort of, theoretical mutts. I was originally a psychologist. I'm a sort of, I've read a lot and done a lot of work with sociologists. I'm a wannabe anthropologist. I do a lot of anthropologically inspired fieldwork activities. We have linguists who are working with us. I'm working on another project right now, which is about how-to queries and how people put queries about how do I make my zabaglione not taste like scrambled eggs? How do I put that into a search engine and actually have it understand and give me sensible things back? So last year I finished a series of studies on craft and how people are finding out how to weld and sew and knit and do crochet, and how they're using things like YouTube to show others. I'm sure many of you have come across sites like Instructables. So those are sort of, activities, and that the way we interact with the content we want to get to is, of course, through language. So we have a lot of linguists helping us understand if a query is phrased in a certain way, what's it likely, what's the user's intent? What is it they're really trying to get at? Of course, we have computer scientists and designers helping us understand how to build a system and how to build the interaction design so that people can actually get at the things we want them to. So what are people doing? Well, we've been hearing a lot about Web 2.0 and the changes in the way in which information is presented. And this is from, I'm sure many of you recognize it from O'Reilly's 2005 article about Web 2.0. And, that services, not packaged software. I'm going to talk a little bit about services. It's scalability, architectures of participation. And I was just poking around this morning because the US government has, opened up a lot of content just in the last day or so, I think. And you can now get an FBI widget downloaded to your screen, should you wish to have one. I looked at my latest patent in XML, which made me ridiculously excited. I mean, these little things in life that make us happy. But these architectures of participation and representation are really here now. I love the perpetual beta. I'm sure everybody recognizes that. Hackability. I've talked about the Yahoo Developer Network. Lots of companies are very committed to having these permeable boundaries. So, I'm sure you're all very familiar with these things, but it's like, what does that mean for people every day who are the producers and the consumers and the tinkerers and tailorers? People like me who I don't really hack, but the idea of being able to get my hands on an API and get some data from Flickr makes me very excited. So I'm learning as I go, and I'm finding other people who can help me learn. And scaffolding that learning really matters. And the other experience we have, of course, the front end of this is, the Flick Twit face space. How many people, you've said about Flickr, how many of you Twitter? Excellent, very good. Facebook, more Facebookers? Great. And how many of you MySpacers? Yeah. Well, we've become kind of accustomed to using these things to get in touch with people, and sometimes there's quite a lot of labor. I have to check all of these and all of my emails every day, and I'm moving between, and I have overlapping social networks because not everybody is on everything. And the other thing that's happening is people that I used to meet on Flickr are all on Twitter now. So I had a conversation with a friend the other day who said, if you want to know where I am, you have to tweet. I'm like, but you're my friend. I want to phone you. Oh, I don't answer the phone anymore. Tweet me. Okay, so these are really how our social relationships are kind of unfolding and changing and being navigated and negotiated. The two darlings of the media right now are Facebook and Twitter. And if we have a look here, you just demonstrated this here. Facebook has taken over from MySpace, which is still a very vibrant space. I just finished a series of interviews last summer, actually, with Ayman Sharma, who works with me, on DJs on the internet. And they are still really hot for MySpace, and they do a lot of embeds of video of their activities into my space. So there are people who are still very much in those spaces. So if we go from those aggregate numbers down to who's there and who's utilizing those resources, we do see particular subgroups who are still happily there. This is Twitter. Just in the last few months, gone to 19.1 million. And I think part of the media darlingness, as we've just heard about it, is, Obama's sort of campaign, very much involved with these technologies and with Twitter and others, in particular Twitter, has become the thing. It's become everywhere you go online. You hear people say Twitter, 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 Twitter. But, and there he is. But what's interesting is the retention rate. I'm not sure if you've seen, in the last couple of days, there's been a report that, people come to Twitter, sign up, and most people leave within a month or don't do anything. So what's interesting is, sure, we've got the numbers, but it's really not clear who's staying and what they're doing and who's getting what kind of value from it until you start looking at the details. The numbers tell you something, ooh, big numbers. They don't tell you a lot about what's actually going on. And here's where I'm going to start going into some of my projects. Because I think the other thing that's really interesting to me is how much time do people spend in these places? They tend to be fairly short-term, and so I would argue that it tends to be pretty much informational exchange. On Facebook, I'm aware of what my friends are doing. I get invites for things. I see some new pictures that I glance by. I get a bunch of news, and I'm skimming. I'm skimming very fast through. I might have one or two little conversations that pop up, and I sort of IM through Facebook. But mostly, I get sort of irritated when somebody interrupts me and keeps me there, because that's not my intent. Some people are spending more time, and it tends to be typically the younger demographic, but we're not generally staying in these spaces very long. They're very informational and contact spaces, but they're not real spaces of deep connection and collaboration. That's not to say there's anything wrong with them. What I'm saying is there are opportunities for these other kinds of spaces. Flickr, I don't have the data on this, but I suspect that for die-hard Flickr users, they're spending a lot more time. So the studies that I've conducted suggest that people use Flickr for many different things, which they're using Facebook for somewhat, but documenting. There's a personal and collective memory that's being created. A lot of people are archiving their content to Flickr, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. People are getting engaged in competitions with each other. Flickr has a lot of competitions, the best, the interestingness, and there's a lot of badges you can get. A lot of people said that they came to Flickr to meet other photographers and learn how to be a photographer. People came because they're baristas and they want to share the craft of being a barista. People come and they're part of a class and they're using Flickr to share some content. So there's a lot of affiliation learning and a lot of this awareness stuff. And there's also a lot of curiosity and voyeurism. I talk to a lot of people who basically spend a lot of time surfing through, connecting through contacts to contacts to contacts, just looking at other people's lives. So all of that's to say that I think people spend a little bit more time maybe organizing themselves around the content or browsing the content in Flickr. And of course, how many World of Warcrafters? Aha! You're all working too hard. People will spend days, months in World of Warcraft. Talk about, engaged. They are meeting other people, they are creating their world, they're fighting, they're planning offline, they're coming back. It's a really fully engaged, full-body sport. People get really, really, really involved. And so I think there's a sort of continuum from engagement, awareness, I should say, and skimming through to deep engagement and co-collaboration, co-production. The more serious kinds of ways of thinking about co-production are distributed teams around the world who are building software, all right, in an organizational and a work context or an open source context, but they're distributed and they're immersed and they're working together and building things together. And those are the sorts of things I'm really interested in. And as part of that, my team kind of looks at the tools that those folks use, and we're kind of looking at old models and new models and thinking about how the dimensions of media experience have really gone from text to rich multimedia. And if anybody's worked with video, and trying to create, for example, instructables online where you're teaching somebody how to make a body cast, creating the video that's the right video for each one of those steps is a huge amount of labor and work. People have gone from one place to on the move. We can't assume that people are reading stuff at their desktop, or that they're in one place in the world. I got a bunch of phone calls yesterday. I was online and on the phone to San Francisco working with my team, and I was walking around with my BlackBerry. So, where are we and what are we doing? The design of the experience has become more complicated. Persistence. I think there was a sort of early idea that, I go online and I've got my identity and, it's going to go away and it's sort of ephemeral and it doesn't really matter and I'm going to play around here. Now we're actually starting to see, Facebook's a really good example, people going, oh my God, somebody put that picture up of me from, 6 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I didn't know that was going to still come back and haunt me. And durability is an interesting thing because there's a tension between it came back to haunt me and I really don't want it there, and oh my goodness, my archive backup died and I've lost it. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And there's this alone to unknown either. There's most theories in HCI, in human-computer interaction, were originally based on a single operator putting data into a single machine that was stable and static through text. We now have a lot of people co-creating together with other people that they don't know. And the only reason I'm laying this all out is because I think, although it might seem obvious, the implications for how you design something are really important. And we're borrowing design methodologies and ideas which quite often are anachronistic and not understanding how they need to apply to this new world of social media. There was a lovely talk last night by a designer, Alex, I think her name was, who did a lovely talk on outlining some of those issues that are coming up. And I think as educators in HCI programs, we are increasingly facing the challenge of trying to invent the methodology for the design and the evaluation methods as we go along. It's sort of interesting. So I'm now going to give you just a few examples to kind of, flesh out some of what I've talked about and just some of my favorite projects. And the key research areas and themes are really kind of this, how do you go from short-term and informational to conversational and collaborative? How do you think about access? And I mean access from the point of view of literacy and learning, as well as encountering information. So from the literacy point of view, I've already mentioned this idea about open APIs and learning how to be a hacker. And, where do I go to find out more information about how to do something and get the help I need? But there's also, I want to give you an example, I did a study a few years ago where I talked to seniors, older people, about how they use the internet. And there was one lady in particular, many of them were familiar with the internet and were using the internet. I'm talking about people over 65, so they're not necessarily that old in today's terms. But, I talked to one older lady who was in her 80s, and she had a very nice PDA that, this was in Japan, that her kids had bought her, and she uses it all the time to be in touch with her kids, send pictures and get pictures and so forth. And I said to her, what do you think of computers? And she didn't have this accent because she was Japanese, but just indulged me for a minute. She said, oh, love, I don't use computers. This is the internet. And I thought that was amazing because it made me realize that my literacy makes an assumption about this being a computer. And I have designed cell phone experiences that are inspired by the desktop experience. And actually I have to start all over again and think, hang on a minute, that's my literacy, that you go from desktop to phone. Many people's literacy, younger and older than me, is phone and maybe to desktop. But she really shook up my notion of what does it mean to understand and who, what are the assumptions I'm making about how people understand. So learning and literacy, I think, are very interesting areas here. And encountering. We increasingly, and this has come up a lot in my newspaper study, people know what they want to know and they filter. And when I go to Facebook, I've got my friends and I've chosen them all, and I'm not one of those people that says, yay, everybody come on in. I'm like, yes, I've met you and I know you, or I've met you face to face at least once. And I'm heavily filtering the content. So if I only read my news from Facebook forwards, that's heavily filtered. Whereas, when I pick up a newspaper, which I have been reading the local paper here. Ooh, look at that. Who knew that? I would never have thought to seek that out, but look at that. So that kind of encountering is really important. And when you scale that up, it's, you know, the other thing is, I'm going to show you a study, but, you know, we're always in our little devices like this. And half the time, if I bump into anything in the world, it's because I'm not looking. But you see, the whole world is annotated with information that's there to kind of inspire us. And if you live in a world of like, you know, subways or like the tube, you just see a lot of information. If you live in my world of getting in my car and driving to Santa Clara and then driving back and listening to NPR, I don't encounter very much information other than my really slim, narrow situation. And I just think that's interesting. Long-term content storage. Digital content management is the next big challenge. Loads of people here have been to several talks about this, about organizing and managing information. And I think that's the next big thing. Last year, AOL Hometown closed down. I don't know if anybody had any content on there, but a lot of people lost content. And there was one particularly interesting piece I read, which was somebody said, oh my God, I had 3 days and I've put all of my content on GeoCities. I had to migrate it all, and it took me a while to work out how to do it, but I did it. GeoCities just closed. So just a thought. Okay. Hello. Speaking to me. Okay. So I'm just going to give you some ideas some prototypes that have come from some of these ideas. Here we are looking at people sharing video. So this is very social media space. You've got people, you've got comments, you've got favorites, you've got all of these tags and embeds and blah, 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 all of the things we heard about. But what's really interesting to me as a psychologist is that the content is separate from the comments. If you think about, you know, the content is all coming down here, is all up here, and the comments are coming down here. If I do sort of real sharing with you, I come over here and I hand you something. And there's a real pointing to what it is I'm looking at here in that situation. So one of the things we thought about was, rather than have a video that's just up there, and I send you a link and you may or may not look at it, what we want to do, we've got videos embedded in Instant Messenger, and I'm sure many of you have tried that. But what we wanted to do was put a watch with me button. So we're moving from asynchronous, and I would argue low social obligation, to high synchronous and social obligation and sharing in the moment. I'm having an experience at the same time as you. And so we made Zinc. And this was the brainchild of Ayman Sharma, who I mentioned earlier, who's on my team. And what Zinc lets you do, I'm going to see if I can get a video to work, excuse me. Zinc lets you click on the link, and instead of on the watch with me, and instead of it me being, I'm watching it and you're watching it, we literally watch it together and we can chat at the same time. It's a simple idea, but it's a fundamental shift in the notion of shared experience, I would argue. See if we can get this to work. So this is, I'm in a camera and my guys typing to each other. You can see this was the prototype because there's a bit too much clicking going on here. It is actually working now. I'm going to show you. Okay, so we should have sound coming up, maybe. And so one of them paused it. So there's this whole thing about, why are you pausing it? And, you know, as a technologist, we might say, oh, we don't want to let people do that, right, because that's annoying. What we have found is that, you know, why are you pausing that? Blimmin' well, stop it. Actually is the fundamental of creating a shared experience. So here we go. You get the idea. And we've been talking to folks like KQED about using this for educational context. And right now it works with dyads, but we're hoping to generalize it for more people, which will be a nightmare. Nightmare of arguing. Anyway, we released this. It came out as a sort of prototypey version. It's been around for a while. And then we rebuilt and refactored the back end. Because one of the things that I'm really interested in is most data that get collected are kind of what I call artifactual to the machine. So most data that get collected about what people are clicking on and so forth are because we can collect it easily, and a lot of the data are for optimization of the system, where I'm talking about the business system or the technical system. I'm interested in human experience, and most data that are collected are not optimized for me understanding what it is that people are doing. The example in this instance would be, the obvious thing to collect would be the video played, the video ended. But what I care about is the video got scrubbed and paused, because that's what the people cared about. It's not telling me that the video worked or didn't work, it's telling me the experience. So we refactored the back end of this to really start to build what are the hotspots in different videos that get paused, and there's a lot of chat around it. We can't actually collect chat, so it's against Yahoo policies to collect what you type, but we can collect emoticons, because they are not content, and we can see how much you type. I didn't say it's not content, but it just, we're allowed emoticons. So if you do a smiley, we know that you're happy. But I can't test, I can't collect data saying, I really think this is brilliant. But we can see a little bit about how much you say. So we're collecting data about, wow, a lot of conversation around that particular video, and it happened right in the middle of the video. We don't know what it was, but it was like a big buzz going on. I wonder what that was. And of course, we will follow up with field investigations to ask people what they actually were doing to try and get that content with their permission. Anyway, that's just to go, everybody loves this when you have a technology, woo, look at that, wee, goes up. And we have 250,000 independent, unique users a month at this point. And it's growing, so I'm very happy about that. This is another similar thing. What we've done here is we've scraped the tweet data from the election, from the debates, and Ayman has built this, as I play along in different parts of the debate, the tweets that are going at that time come up, so we're just visualizing the tweets. And what I want you to, and this is really new, we've sort of just started doing the analysis on this, so this is a bit crufty, but on the right-hand side, I want you to look at that, because we distinguish between tweets which are, hey, everybody out there, comment, I'm commenting, hello, and tweets that are at you, and you back at me. So I would argue the second is conversational, and the other is like soapbox. And the blue is soapbox, the red is conversational. And if you notice at the end of the debates, we've got this, a whole blast of people sending out comments. So what we're going to do with this is we've got Super Bowl data and a couple of other, data sets. And we're going to start to look at whether the structure of the conversation changes depending on the social context of viewing, i.e., can I make predictions about the kind of genre of content to say what kind of conversation structure is going to take place between people? Is it that some kinds of content lead to grandstanding and soapboxing, and other kinds of content mean that people direct to between each other individually? And does it matter? So we're just starting to really take this detailed conversational approach, marrying things like Twitter and content. And of course, during the election, Current TV and other places were really starting to link in Twitter, and now you've got CNN, you've got the Twitter feed, you've got Twitter in the background on the news, you've got Twitter on football games, it's everywhere. But what we're really interested in looking at is what is the nature of the cacophony? What is the nature of that interaction that occurs? Can we make predictions? And can we seed to get people more or less engaged, or offer governance or encouragement? So that's what we're doing with these data. So I'm going to go on to a different thing. This is a thing on personals. So I did a series of interview studies and studies looking at, how am I doing for time, am I right? Yeah. Looking at how people use online dating. And I was really interested because online dating is a very particular kind of match algorithm, right? You go in and you define yourself. So I showed you profiles earlier, and you say, I am a couch potato, and I am slim, and I am above average height. And these are the nightmarish things to do. I don't know how many of you have done this, but it's a nightmare. And then you decide on your ideal person. So there's a human defining themselves in terms of a machine for a matchmaking algorithm that we later discovered through interviews, that people are tweaking the system on the basis of what they're second-guessing the algorithmic match is going to do, they don't call it that, to find the right person. So there's a lot of interesting work goes on in this. Now that's one aspect of what we did with this work, which was to say, what would the matching algorithm look like? How could it be different? How could it surface itself differently? How can you encourage people to put different kinds of content in about themselves? So, you know, if I'm having a conversation with you, I don't kind of go, I'm above average height and I'm a couch potato. What I'm more likely to say is be myself and then say, yeah, I spent the last 3 nights watching TV actually because, you know, Galactica, I downloaded it and I just can't stop watching it. You now know through conversation a little about me. I didn't have to define what that all means. So we've been doing some work around how do you encourage people to put in content that's scrapable and manageable for the algorithmic back-end match in a different way, which is conversational content. The other thing we've been doing is looking at the notion of service. And we know we've said service here a few times, and I'm very interested in where service starts and where it stops. So for most dating sites, the service looks sort of like this. You make a profile, you search and select, you do a little bit of communicating. I send you a wink, I send you a rose, I might get your email, and then that's it. The service part of it is sort of over. The dating site as a service, it's over. Go on, meet each other, let us know. We'll assume if you didn't come back, a successful customer is someone who leaves, right? Now, I thought this is really interesting because when I did these interviews, the piece that really got people hot under the collar was actually that first date. It was bad enough they're sitting at home doing all this work, and then there's oh my goodness, I'm going to meet this person, and I'm starting to phone my friends, and I'm online, what to wear for a first date, and I'm trying to find where to go, and I want to talk to them and hear their voice first. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of packaging of oneself. I should say that people go through these sorts of cycles. They go through anxious, happy about it. After the 5th failed date, they're sort of in a depressed state. I'm going to show up in my shorts and I don't really care. And then they're down, there's no one for me. And then they kind of get back on the horse. And, you know. So, you know, you do see these patterns. But I thought, whoa, wow, I wonder what opportunities there are for us to provide an extension to the service where we're actually helping people plan the date. And I'll show you what I mean. I did think about trying to design some things for the cell phone experience, but I looked into a lot of the services that exist, which seem to be things like, my phone is really hot for your phone, i.e., I'm at the supermarket on a Saturday morning, and my phone and my service alerts your phone and your service that we're in the same place and we're on the same service and we're both single. And I can't imagine anything worse than that. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to run. So I think there's something really interesting in that space. I just don't think we've done the design work yet. But more mundanely, one of the things I looked at was when people are planning their first date. Now, I don't know how big, I mean, Wellington doesn't seem so big, but we're talking about people I interviewed in the East Bay of, you know, Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, the South Bay, San Jose, and San Francisco. And San Jose is about an hour drive south of San Francisco. East Bay, depending on traffic, is anything from 20 minutes to an hour and a half. Public transport down to San Jose, not so good. So what you might have is somebody down in San Jose dating somebody in Berkeley, and they decide to meet in San Francisco because it's the obvious meeting point, but neither of them are very familiar with the city. And so what we found was that people would be, yeah, well, I got a map up, and then I went onto Yelp, and I looked through Yelp to see what kind of thing she might like. And then I sent an email. But then she came back and said she didn't like that. And then, so what I did was I went and found out what events there were, and I sent her a bunch of links on that, and she didn't like any of those. But then she sent me this back, and where does the Caltrain stop anyway? Oh, right. So there's a lot of work of planning. Now, I'm talking about dating, but imagine organising, I don't know, a night out with, you know, for a hen party, or, you know, a bachelor party in New Orleans was another example we had. There's a lot of resources that are being marshalled by the individual. They are doing the work of marshalling the resources and making sense. And the piece of it that's really important to me as a psychologist is the recipient of this flood of emails from this well-intentioned research can quite often end up going, oh my God, I am overwhelmed by this person. There's some really nice research about video conferencing, which showed that basically if it's a really good connection, everybody's like, oh, it's fine. If it's a really bad connection, everybody is like, this system doesn't work. If it's an intermittent connection, and you might recognize this from cell phones, you're like, oh my God, you're so stupid. Why can't you understand what I'm saying? People blame the other person and assume the other person is being difficult, even when they know that the technology is the problem, because the frustration gets kind of spilt over. And we saw that in this dating study. So we designed MapChat. It is a mashup. It is a Web 2.0 technology. And it uses things that Yahoo has. So we have your buddy list. We have a map, which is interactive. We have Yahoo Locals down the side. It's a local search. You put in a search and you get results. And you can see the chat at the bottom. I have a video of this I could show folks later, but I didn't want to risk doing this online. And so what it does is, you've got your contacts, you can also see searches. So we made it so that you could see your searches, but in this instance, I can look to see what Cameron has been searching for. So let me give you a scenario for that. I'm searching for meat restaurants. And then I have a look and see what Cameron is searching for, and it's all vegan. He didn't have to tell me he's a vegan. I might go, oopsie, all right, vegan then, vegan it is. So that's sending those subtle cues that are not explicitly spoken. I've told you something about what I care about without having to go, oh, I'm a vegan, I'm sorry. Where you look at on the map tells somebody about what's interesting to you. And this experience, I should say, it can be asynchronous or synchronous. I, as, I was going to say Don Juan. What would be Donna Juanita? Right? I come on, and I'm like, I'm going to make the perfect date. So I come in, and I look up through locals, and I put some little annotations in, and I make some comments, and then I write, and I invite Mike, and I say, I have the perfect date. And he can come in and actually have a look at what I've selected, or we can chat in real time about it, and he can search. So it's very much about co-planning. So you've got the picture-in-picture. If Mike chooses to go off to a completely other part of the world, like New York, his picture-in-picture comes up showing me what he's looking at. And if I click on that, I can go to where he is. So the map is loosely coupled with some indications of where the other person is. So there's the map, there's the picture-in-picture. It is interactive. There's the live chat. The link, the British Food Centre, is, if you click on that, it'll take you to a place that I have selected and annotated in the live map. It's been kept. Or we can just chat down there, which is not related. Remember, I said conversation on content. This can be around the content or on the content. There's your contacts. There's your search results. We have a thing called bundled favorites. If I come up with 6 things to do, so it's like, hey, there's pizza, and then there's this shop, and then there's this movie, and then there's this dinner. I can bundle that into my favorite date. And when I come back next time, my favorite date is still there. Okay? So I can use it on anybody, basically. There's the searches, and there's the picture-in-picture. Anyway, so I can show you a video of it later, but I wanted to show this as it's a mashup of services, in the technical sense, to add to a dating service to help people find dates. It could be added to the travel service and to plan together. And I argue that that co-planning is not for everybody. Somebody might want to just meet that date wherever, or just meet up in New York and go whatever. But if you really want to plan together, and that's part of the experience of going on holiday with your friends who aren't there, this is a really interesting way of extending that social relationship with the other person around content that you both care about. You can play with it at MapChat. And I think it's a real kind of value add. And the other thing is, remember I said I'm interested in the back-end algorithmic work? One of the things here is that I now know that you usually search on San Francisco and New York. I know that you bundle up content in certain kinds of ways. And I know that you share, ice hockey dates with your friends A, B, and C, Jane and Jack and Jeffrey, and that's what you care about with them. Over here is Alice and Bob and Carol, and you really care about knitting with them, and you're always looking for knitting shops. So what that says is that I'm not an individual user, and I'm not an aggregate. I'm actually a person with a particular face to certain social groups, and that matters to me. If you make a recommendation to me when I'm talking to Alice and Bob and Carol, and it's actually about hockey, it's kind of silly. Because actually what we have in common and care about is knitting. But I can introduce them to hockey maybe, but it would be a little inappropriate if you kind of bumbled in and said, come on everybody. So it's really about how do we start modeling for people in their social contexts. And what we're doing is building some models on the basis of how these details come together to make recommendations. Okay. All right, next. So if that's kind of deep collaboration and conversation, this is really about access and finding things, encountering information that you're not actively seeking. And this is a picture that I took in, I think it's Shinjuku, maybe Shibuya. I think it's Shinjuku. And especially in Japan and in a lot of Asian countries, you're just like assaulted with all this bright color and information and stuff to look at. You know, it's everywhere. The physical world is really annotated with rich information. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know. And what I'm interested in is the fact that the other thing about this is that if I'm walking along and you're walking along with me and you look up, I go, from your body movement, I now know that you've seen something interesting. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, but I see it. And I look to where you're looking. And so there's that awareness of other people's interest. There's that awareness of orientation to information that's very much part of our having a body and walking around being really social. And I think one of the things about being in the online world is, I'm always like in here. And you don't know what I'm looking at. Oh, news study. I've been taking photos on the BART and looking at how people have newspapers. And I'm incredibly nosy, as you've probably gathered. So I'm always looking at what people are reading. And I looked on the BART the other day, and everybody's got their iPhone. And I'm like, because if I actually sort of look over your shoulder and look at your iPhone, it's a little rude. But I don't know the world. You've stopped annotating the world for me, and it's a much more boring place. So this is something I designed many years ago. It's a product in Japan now. And there was this idea that, sure, we're having all of these relationships online and sharing stuff, and I'm forwarding things to you, and I'm sending you pictures, and I'm sending you videos. But what about people out there in the physical world? How this started was that I'd been doing some field work on mobile phones and hot desking. And I went to an organization, and I noticed that they had a lot of posters on the wall, like those big, like big, huge post-its on the walls, where they were writing stuff down for each other. The reason being that the minute you walked in, you could see a little bit about what so-and-so was up to, rather than waiting to plug in your laptop, open it up, and go for your email. Right? So as you walked in, you encountered the information of who was doing what immediately. You didn't have to open your device. And so what we designed was this idea that you have this online shared space that's email and web-based, but you can also publish that information to the physical world. So I have my wedding pictures. I send you a link to my URL, my webpage with all my wedding pictures. But I also send as an attachment an email a bunch of my wedding pictures to any of the large interactive displays in the physical space I work through some kind of manager, distribution manager. And so in the act of sharing it online to my community members, I've also shared it to those peripheral participants who might not be part of the online community, but they're part of my broader work community of people I see in the lift every day. And it's up there, it's like a poster board, it's like a movie poster. And so there's this idea of this window between the digital and physical and giving people the ability to post into the physical world. And the research angle that we had on this was looking at the theories around how the physical and digital world shape each other. We've all been hearing about information ecologies, of how information flows through channels was a particular word that you just used. But we have this idea that information flows through these ecologies, and I was interested in how it goes from the physical back to the digital. We print stuff out and we stick it up on the wall. I bet some of you at least in here have a fridge like mine, which is covered with stuff, right? Little bits and pieces, some of which I've printed out. Anyway, so we went off and we did a bunch of fieldwork on displays and message boards and looked at how the physical world, is used. And we looked at formal reports, and we looked at things with little tear-off strips, and we looked at, handmade and nicely constructed posters and so forth. We also looked at how things riffle in the wind and so forth. And I've got a video of interface we did, which kind of simulates that, which I'll show you later, but I didn't put it in this deck, but I can show you later. But this was the concept. Please play. Please play. Played earlier. Well, while that one's... here we go.
The plasma poster is a digital community bulletin board. It takes advantage of the fact that not all communications need to be directed, but that much communication can be about advertising one's interests to members of the community in an informal way. Elizabeth is researching online media and finds a picture that may be of interest to her colleagues. She decides to post the URL to the plasma poster, a digital community bulletin board in the lab. Since it is located in a high-traffic area, she knows that people will see it, and, if it catches their eye, they can come and chat with her about it. She adds a note to this effect to the posting. The URL does not only go to her lab, but to 3 plasma posters at 3 different labs: Japan, California, and Grenoble. This is made possible by the distributed information architecture that underlies the plasma posters. A little later, Dave and TK see the post at the California lab and think it looks interesting. They chat for a while and then decide to leave an informal message for Elizabeth about it at the plasma poster itself. The next day, Les, who is in Grenoble, sees Elizabeth's posting. He has met Elizabeth before but did not know she was interested in this kind of art. He decides to chat with her about it, so he calls her to arrange an audio conference with his group. Back in California, Elizabeth sees that she has a message on the board and reads that Dave and TK thought the site was interesting. She sends an email suggesting they join her in the audio conference with Les. Elizabeth, TK, and Dave audio conference with Les and decide to collaborate on the novel interaction methods invention proposal that Les has been working on. Knowing TK has been busy all day, Elizabeth leaves her a message on the plasma poster. TK sees her note and comes to find Elizabeth. Just as the links on personal web pages can help people find out more about our interests and lead to conversation, postings on the plasma poster can lead to conversations and the realization of shared interests as well as inspiring new interests.
So that was the first prototype, as you gathered. We installed these, we improved the interface, we installed these all over the place. And this is, I'm going to just talk over this one. This is, we won a design award for this. We really wanted to get our colleagues in Japan posting as much as we did, and so we designed the interface to actually dedicate real estate to them and to us, so there was an ownership of the real estate. And we really started to get the distribution network worked out so that you could send content to certain boards rather than other boards. As you saw, we had the touch interaction, and you could select the people that you wanted to forward content to from the board. You could print. You could forward it. It was a soft keyboard. You could forward to yourself. And so what we did was we built a back-end distribution system and a set of interaction elements. And then we created a number of these installations. We did, I think, nearly 20 by the end of it, which were bespoke front-end solutions with bespoke access control privileges. Some places had an editor for content that posted. Other places had the community fully posting. And we posted in different places, like organizations with very closed boundaries, and cafes and art installation, art cafes and like places where there's, open mic and so forth. And we wanted to look at how those different communities would share content with each other. So how do you, around a place, create the sort of sharing that you want? We installed them also in government buildings in Tokyo, where there was an editor who would take content from the local people and post it. And it was particularly successful for older people who would be sort of walking by and they would see things that had come up that they wouldn't necessarily think to go and look for. That comes back to my point about filtering and search, and a very gentle, community-oriented push rather than a pull. So we really sort of tried to just play with that space. As I say, there was a back-end social networking content management system, and the front end was on a cell phone or on the public displays or on a desktop. As I said, lots of different interfaces. We install them at conferences for ad hoc communities that come together and then disperse. And as I say, we put them in organizations so that there was some cross-team fertilization around projects as well. So the last thing I really want to come to is this idea about content and about all of this content that we're generating. And I already told you the story about, a hometown followed by GeoCities. And one of the things that I've been really becoming interested in, and I've done a series of studies on personal archive, is the extent to which people understand what to do with all of these data that are now sitting in these social media repositories, essentially. I have well over 10,000 photos in Flickr, for example. How do I back those data up? How do I get those data off? People are buying terabyte drives in the home. Most people don't know what a RAID system is, but many people will tell you they've lost a laptop or a backup or some kind of drive. There are services that I just sent off my photo backup drive, and it's it's about to be sent off. I think it's going to be about $700 maybe to get the pictures off. This is going to get worse. This is going to get bigger. And it's bad on an individual level, but if you think about it on a cultural level, and if you think about it, in terms of all of the resources that we have as a community and as a culture, where are those resources going to reside? There was a lovely talk on the first day of the conference, which was around, somebody was talking about NASA and the tapes that have degraded, and the content that was originally available is no longer available. It's really important, I think, that we think about that now. And I'm just starting to think about that. I've been working with a colleague, Jeff Uboys, on what does it mean for what is personal archive, what does it mean for cultural archive and community archive and access? I don't have answers. I'm just really interested in the conversations that are possible here around that. This is one example. My friend Steve, his Flickr site got phished and deleted. Flickr has done their best to reinstate all of the content. The content they cannot reinstate easily are all of the comments that we've put on. And so the point about social media is that photograph might well belong to you, but in fact it doesn't. It belongs to me too. Because the minute that I put a photo as an annotation on your photo, or a set of comments on your photo, it's ours. But technically, the pointers to that content is to you. So if it all goes away, my stuff's gone away too. And so the way we store data and the way we think about a data object in a social media space, technically and socially, is changing. And I've been getting more interested in this issue of data portability, the politics around that, the technical issues around that, net neutrality. I'm sure many people here, I make all kinds of assumptions about what's available to me. I mean, forget the newspapers being free. I mean, goodness, if we don't actively think about this stuff, it just might not be there for the young people we know now. So there's a lot more to do. I've told you some of my old passions, my current passions, and my future passions. Conversations and content, making that deep collaboration, keeping people in spaces working together around content and making content together. Going from the online to the offline, like in the dating situation. Going from the offline to the online, like in the encountering boards situation. And this thing about archive and personal and cultural memory and who's going to take care of our stuff. So these are my little obsessions, and I'd love to take any questions. And as I say, I'm around all day, so I'd be happy to chat. And these are my guys. Ayman Sharma and Cameron Jones are in my team. There's a number of interns who have worked with us on this work, and I also want to thank FXPAL and Fuji Xerox, who funded all of the poster board work and brought that to market as a product. And thank you all for listening.
We don't have time for questions, but Elizabeth is here for the morning, so do come and have a chat to her. Very interesting person, and she's given us a lot of things to think about in taking that technology and using it to deliver services in ways that are meaningful to people. So morning to your waits. Thank you.
And please do come and talk to me here, there, anywhere. I'm available. Would love to talk. Thank you.